Chapter 5 The King Revealed Christmas morning arrived. Thousands came to see all the kings and dukes attempt to lift the sword from the stone. The Archbishop sat upon the high throne. All his court of clerks and knights gathered about him. 19 kings and 16 dukes of royal lineage were to try to lift the sword from the stone. The atmosphere was filled with excitement and anticipation. First to make trial of the sword was King Lot of Orkney, son-in-law of Uther Pendragon. He climbed the Marble Rock, saluted the Archbishop, and bent over the sword. But try as he might, he was unable to move the sword, even slightly. 3 times he tried, but each time came no closer. Finally he gave up. King Urin, Uther Pendragon's other son-in-law, tried next, but neither did he succeed. Nor did King Fion of Scotland, or King Mark of Cornwall, or King Leodegrance of Cameliard, or King Pellinore. Try as they might, no king nor duke was able to move the sword. Some were angry, others ashamed. When all the kings and dukes had failed, the crowd began to whisper, "How is this? If all those kings and dukes of exalted estate have failed to achieve this, who then can succeed?" So, too, the kings began to talk amongst themselves. Then they approached the Archbishop. "Sir, here have all the kings and dukes of the realm striven before you to lift the sword from the stone, and none have succeeded. Perhaps the enchanter Merlin has set this adventure only to bring shame and discredit upon us. For who in the world could draw a sword out of an iron stone? It is impossible. We ask you to choose from your great wisdom one of us to become overlord." "Have faith," the Archbishop called out, "for surely Merlin will explain this to us all." Merlin had bidden Arthur, Sir Kay, and Sir Ector to keep hidden until he was ready for them. Now Merlin and Sir Ulfius walked into Sir Ector's pavilion and spoke. "Arise, Arthur," Merlin called. "It is time for you to show the world the miracle you showed us." Arthur did as Merlin asked and came forth from the pavilion dressed in flame-colored embroidered robes. They went to the cathedral and the great marble rock. The crowds let them pass as people asked, "Who are these with the enchanter Merlin and Sir Ulfius?" Merlin said no word to any one, but brought Arthur directly to where the Archbishop sat. The Archbishop arose and asked, "Merlin, who are these young you bring with you, and what is their business here?" "Here is one to try to pull the sword from the stone," he answered, and called Arthur forward. "Merlin, by what right does this young man come forward?" asked one of the angry kings. "By the best right there is," shouted Merlin, "for he who stands before you is the true son of Uther Pendragon." "But Uther Pendragon had no children," cried out the Archbishop. "Not so," answered Merlin, and told the crowd of Arthur's secret birth. "All that Merlin has spoken is true," rang out the voices of Sir Ector and Sir Ulfius. "Let the boy show you." Then Arthur laid his hands upon the sword, lifted it out of the stone, and swung it around his head 3 times. Then he placed it back in the stone. Now, when the people who were congregated at the place beheld it, they shouted so loud that it was as though the whole earth rocked and trembled. And while they shouted, Arthur took hold of the sword, lifted it from the stone, and once more swung it about his head 3 times. Then he placed it back in the stone, picked it up yet again, and repeated it for the 3rd time. All the kings and dukes were filled with great amazement that a young man was able to perform what they had failed to do. Most were willing to acknowledge Arthur as the true king. Some, like King Pellinore, felt bitter in their hearts and vowed to fight the new king. The Archbishop proclaimed Arthur king of all England. The crowd gave another great shout. As Arthur departed, the crowds followed after him, hoping to get near him or touch his clothes. Arthur was uplifted with great joy and gladness, so that his soul took wing and flew like a bird into the sky. Chapter 6. King Arthur and the Black Knight. Word came to King Arthur and his court at Camelot of an evil knight in black armor who lived in a deep forest and attacked all who trespassed near his lonely castle. To the young king defeating the Black Knight in battle would be a worthy deed. So in his armor, together with Merlin, he set out for the forest. After a while they saw a violent stream of water that rushed through a dark and dismal glen. Over the water was a stone bridge, and beyond the bridge a tall, dark, forbidding castle. Upon the bridge hung a black shield beneath which was written, "Whoso smiteth this shield doeth so at his peril." On an apple tree near by hung the shields of many knights who had attacked the Black Knight and had been defeated. This must indeed be a powerful knight who has overthrown so many other knights. For indeed there must be 100 shields hanging from yonder tree, said King Arthur. May you be happy, replied Merlin, if your own shield does not hang there before the day is over. That, said Arthur, will be as God wills, for I have a greater mind than ever to try my power against this knight. He seized his mace and struck the black shield a resounding blow that echoed throughout the forest. In answer, the gates of the castle opened, and out came a huge knight clad in armor black as ebony. He rode with much pride, as become a champion who had never been overcome in battle. "Why did you dare smite my shield? For your discourtesy I shall take your shield and hang it upon yonder apple tree where you behold the shields of others who dared to fight me," he called out. "Know this, unkind knight," returned King Arthur, "I have come here to redeem with my person all those shields that hang upon the tree. You shall yield your shield to me." Each got ready to spear and shield. They shouted to their war horses and drove toward each other. Those two noble steeds rushed like lightning, coursing the ground with violent speed. The two fierce riders crashed together like thunderbolts, and their spears burst into splinters. They tried again with new spears, but once again the spears shattered, and once again neither rider was able to unhorse his enemy. Then they tried for the third time. King Arthur's spear burst into splinters, but the spear of the Black Knight held steady and pierced through the center of King Arthur's shield. The straps of the king's saddle burst from the violence of the blow, and his horse cast violently backward. King Arthur jumped off his horse with knightly grace and landed on his feet. The blow he received was so great, however, that for a time he lost his senses and everything whirled before his eyes. When he had recovered, he cried out, "Come down, Black Knight, and fight me on foot and with your sword." "That I will not do," replied the Black Knight. "I have overthrown you, you must deliver your shield to me." King Arthur grabbed the bridle rein of the Black Knight's horse and thrust it back so roughly that the Black Knight had to jump off his horse to keep from being overthrown. And now each man drew his sword and rushed together like two bulls in battle. They struck and parried and struck again. The force of their blows echoed throughout the forest. Whole chunks of armor were hewn from their bodies and each received many serious wounds. At last King Arthur struck such a blow with his sword that the Black Knight groaned and staggered and ran about in circles. But the force of the blow had broken King Arthur's own sword, so he was unable to complete his victory. Presently the Black Knight recovered, and taking his own sword into both hands, struck King Arthur on his helmet with so powerful a stroke that it broke the helmet and seriously wounded the king. Seeing him so seriously injured, the Black Knight called for Arthur to surrender. Arthur would not yield, but lifted himself up by his enemy's sword belt. Then he circled the Black Knight with both arms, placed his knee behind the knight's thigh, and cast him backward upon the ground. With that fall the Black Knight lost consciousness. Arthur straightway unlaced the knight's helmet, and knew that it was none other than King Pellinore, his old enemy. "Ha! Pellinore, is it you? Now yield to me, for you are at my mercy," Arthur cried. He drew a small dagger and held it at his neck. By now Pellinore had recovered from his fall. Seeing how weak his enemy was from the head wound he had given him, he forced the dagger away and heaved King Arthur to the ground. Pellinore picked up the dagger and made ready to kill his opponent. "Stay, Pellinore!" called out the voice of Merlin. "Hold your sacrilegious hand, for he who lies beneath you is none other than Arthur, king of all this realm." "Say you so, old man?" shouted Pellinore. "Then you yourself have doomed him, for Arthur is my enemy who has taken my land, my kingship, and my glory." Merlin lifted up his staff and hit Pellinore across the shoulders. Pellinore immediately fell down as one struck dead. Arthur beheld his enemy lying as though dead, and cried out, "Merlin, what have you done? With your magic you have killed someone who has bested me in fair combat." "Not so," said Merlin. "He is but asleep. You are much closer to death. Without aid you will die shortly." So saying, Merlin slung the wounded Arthur across his horse and led him deep into the forest. He brought Arthur to the holy hermit skilled in treating wounds. He helped keep Arthur alive, but the young king was very weak and his recovery was in doubt. On the next day there came a great noise. It happened that the Lady Guinevere of Cameliard, together with her court, had decided to make a pilgrimage to see the holy hermit. In front of the hermitage, Guinevere saw King Arthur's milk-white war horse tethered to a tree. "Whose noble horse is that?" she asked Merlin, who stood near by. "Alas, it belongs to a knight who lies seriously wounded inside," Merlin answered. "He is near death." "Pity of heaven!" cried the Lady Guinevere. "May I see the wounded knight?" So Merlin brought her into the hermit's cell. She did not know it was King Arthur, but thought she had never beheld so noble a knight in all her life. Arthur, in his weakened state, thought an angel from paradise had descended to visit him. Guinevere had in her court a skilled doctor who tended Arthur's wounds. When the lady and her court departed, Arthur was almost entirely healed. This was the first time that Arthur had beheld that beautiful lady, Guinevere of Cameliard. From that time on she was always in his thoughts, and he pledged that he would serve this lady as faithfully as ever a good knight may serve his chosen lady. Chapter 7. Excalibur. Despite the wounds he had received from King Pellinore, Arthur longed to try his foe in combat once more. "For had my sword not broken," he told Merlin, "I might have conquered that knight. I will challenge him once again." "But you have no sword and no spear, my lord," Merlin reminded him. "How can you undertake this adventure without due preparation?" "Had I no better weapon than an oaken Cudgel, yet I might take on King Pellinore once more, King Arthur said. Seeing how fixed King Arthur was in his purpose, Merlin told him the legend of Excalibur. Near here is the Forest of Adventure. No knight may enter there without an adventure befalling him. Right in the middle of this forest of enchantment is a beautiful wide lake. In the center of that lake is a woman's arm, clad in white samite, the hand holding a sword of such exceeding excellence and beauty that no eye has ever beheld its like. The name of this sword is Excalibur. Several knights have seen this sword and tried to get it, but not one has been able to reach it, and many have lost their lives trying. For when any man draws near it, either he sinks into the lake, or the arm is withdrawn completely. Perhaps you can be the man who gains the glory of capturing the sword. "Lead me to this enchanted land," ordered the king, and Merlin did so. When they entered the enchanted woodlands, they beheld a white doe with a golden collar. They followed her to an opening in the woods of soft, sweet grass. A bower was set with a table of refreshments, white bread, meats, and wine. At the door stood a page boy clad in all green. "Oh, King Arthur, welcome to this place!" he called out to them. "Dismount and partake of the bounty." Arthur hesitated, astonished that this page deep in the forest knew his name. But Merlin assured him that this was a good omen, and they ate and refreshed themselves. After they came upon a meadow filled with the most beautiful flowers they had ever seen. This was a land where the air was so radiant and so bright it appeared to be spun of gold. Bright colored birds sung sweetly in the sky, and midway in the meadow was a beautiful wide lake. At the edge of the lake was what Merlin had foretold. In the midst of the water was the fair and beautiful arm, clad in white samite. The hand held a sword of marvelous workmanship, the hilt crusted with precious jewels and the blade so bright it reflected like a shooting star. King Arthur sat upon his war horse and gazed at the sword. He wondered how he could reach for it, for the lake was wide and deep. As he sat pondering, he suddenly saw a strange lady approaching through the tall flowers. He quickly dismounted and went forward to meet her. As he grew closer, he saw that she was very beautiful, with perfectly black eyes as bright and glistening as two jewels set in ivory. She was all in green, and around her neck hung a beautiful necklace of opals and emeralds set in cunningly wrought gold. King Arthur knelt before her and said, "Lady, I see that you are no mortal damsel, but are certainly a fairy, and I have entered an enchanted land." The lady replied, "King Arthur, you speak truly, for I am indeed. My name is Naimu, and I am the leader of the ladies of the lake. And know you that what you behold is not really a lake, but a meadow filled with flowers in the midst of which stands a white castle. To prevent mortal eyes from seeing our home, my sisters and I have made appear a lake through which no man may pass." "Lady," said King Arthur, "I fear that in coming here I intrude upon the solitude of your dwelling place." "Nay, not so, King Arthur," said the Lady of the Lake, "for in truth you are very welcome. I have a great friendliness for you and the noble knights of your court. What brings you to this land?" King Arthur told her about his battle, his need for a new sword, and how he wanted Excalibur. "That sword is no easy thing to achieve," she answered. "No man may win Excalibur unless he is without fear and beyond reproach." "Alas, lady," said King Arthur, "I may not lack in courage, but there are things for which I do reproach myself. I will still attempt to win the sword. What is the best way?" Then the Lady of the Lake drew a whistle to her lips. Straightway a boat carved of brass, swift as a swan, sped from the middle of the lake to the shore. The Lady of the Lake bade King Arthur enter the boat, and immediately King Arthur felt the boat float swiftly toward the sword. He reached forward and took the sword in his hand, and the arm disappeared beneath the water. Then the king's heart swelled with joy, for Excalibur was 100 times more beautiful than he had imagined. The boat quickly carried him back, and he gave the Lady of the Lake great thanks for all that she had done to help him. King Arthur, with Merlin, rode away rejoicing at having for his own the most beautiful and famous sword in all the world.